All right, hello everybody. This is going to be a book review of the book called Disloyal by Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal lawyer. Really, really good book. I give it like 5 stars out of 5. It was, I read it in 3 days. I bought it on Kindle and just zoomed right through it. What stands out to me is this book is written by someone with insider knowledge into the Trump presidency, as well as what Trump was like before he became president, by a lawyer who was right by his side for the past 10 years, a little bit longer, since 2006 is when he says. And Michael Cohen, who used to be a lawyer, has now been disbarred and disgraced. He's a bad guy. He is like the bad guy in a movie, and this written from the perspective of the villain, who's self-reflective and is explaining why he did what he did, and really dives deep into the incentives. So, in a nutshell, he was just obsessed with Trump. And he says it was like a drug. He wanted Trump's approval. He wanted Trump's... and I've noticed this. In my own life, I have experience with manipulative people. People who just have a charisma. They're likable. Maybe they're dislikable. And I think Trump is like this. And we've gotten to know him over the course of the, this is being recorded in 2020. So at the end of his first term, and we'll see if he gets another term, this book, I have the unique privilege of reading it after it comes out. This is September 17 that I'm recording this, but before the November elections. So I don't know what's going to happen. Probably most people listening know. What went down either way, but I'm not into politics myself. I'm fascinated in it, but for different reasons than most people are in politics. I don't care if I'm a Democrat or a Republican. Democrat and Republican, what that refers to is people within Washington. It refers to congressmen, senators, presidents, obviously, that represent parties. But the average person in most other states outside of DC if you are a registered Republican or Democrat, sure, that means you're like a member of a party, but you probably don't pay dues. You aren't a lobbyist. You probably don't work for a company that, unless you're part of a campaign for like Joe Biden's campaign, you probably are like a member of the Democratic Party and you're actively participating. But the point I'm trying to get to is most Americans are not, they might identify, but about half of them really identify with one party or the other. And, there's some crossover, there's some centrism, but most Americans are not, they might say I'm left leaning or I'm more conservative or, all these things. And they might vote Republican their entire lives or, vote one way or the other. But for most people, politics doesn't matter. And even for those people that are interested in politics, you aren't really a Democrat. You aren't really a Republican unless you are, like I described before. So with that being said, I would classify myself as someone who's I'm definitely interested in American history and politics. Current politics is kind of like history has yet to be unfolded. So that's what I find fascinating. I think this is the weirdest president we've had in my lifetime. I'm 27 years old. So I first voted for Obama in his second term. Then I voted for Hillary Clinton over Trump in 2016. And I will not be voting for Trump in this upcoming election in 2020. I will be voting for Joe Biden, even though I am not super ecstatic about that choice. So that's a little bit about my history. But what I find fascinating is not policy. I find it interesting that American identity and power and our power structures and what we find, like what people in power, why they want to be in power and what drives them. And that's especially true with Trump because he's an outsider into this system, but he's still part of the elite. I mean, what Michael Cohen describes in this book is a really, really unique insight into how people at the very top of society, the elites, it's all a favors game. Because at this point, all of them have money. They all have influence in their own ways. So, for example, the Clinton machine, they referred to it many times in this book, is the network of influence that Bill Clinton had and generated when he was governor of Arkansas. And if I get some of these details wrong, I know my history pretty well, but I might just off the top of my head get some of these details wrong. Google it, fact check me, like go with the idea of what I'm talking about. If I get some details wrong, just let's both move past it. So Clinton's been getting his influence of power and obviously became president in the 90s, and that caused Hillary Clinton to get into politics. And now they have this huge machine going where I'm not convinced that they pay a lot of taxes. I think they find everyone up there, Trump included, finds ways to bend the rules. And you can see how Hillary Clinton got in good with the influence with the Democratic Party. So she became Secretary of State for Obama. Even though she was vying to become president, she felt it was her time. Didn't work out. America chose Obama. The party chose Obama. And then when it was Hillary versus Bernie Sanders, the Democratic National Party and Hillary, with their sphere of influence, shoved Bernie out, who arguably could have been the more popular vote and might have had a better chance to be the Democratic, front runner, primary candidate, and might have fared better against Trump because people just don't like Hillary Clinton, as was evidenced by 2016, or at least where it mattered. Obviously she got more votes, but moving past that. So you describe this in this book. It's so interesting to see the wizard behind, like at the end of The Wizard of Oz, these people at the tip top are so interesting because we see so much of them on TV, especially with Trump. But what is he like behind closed doors? And only a few people know that, and you want to know if it's real or not. And as it turns out, what he presents, the style that he, the bombastic, the guy in the campaign rallies, who says, racist things, just all of Trump's style, that is how he is. I mean, there's a front. He's putting up a fakeade, but this is truly how he operates, and he doesn't have any friends. So, Michael Cohen worked alongside him, was his personal lawyer for the Trump organization, and he says that Trump really has no friends. Kind of definitely a narcissist, definitely an egomaniac, and totally driven by his emotions. Like, if Trump wants something done, he talks like a mob boss, and if it's illegal, he doesn't care. He never says, well, we shouldn't do that because, campaign finance laws will, hey, Michael, can you check those to make sure that we're on the books and we're doing everything ethically? Like, I know from my personal work experience working in corporations and stuff, I've had conversations like this, like, hey, is what we're doing ethical? Is it legal? Are we covered? And I have my immediate boss, my immediate supervisor, they say these things. They go, yes, let's make sure that it's ethical. It's forefront on our minds when we have meetings. We want to make sure we're doing the right things because normal people operate that way. I mean, everybody you and I probably know, whoever you are out there, like, probably you like to follow the rules in some capacity. I mean, there's, things we don't care. We all speed. We all go over the speed limit. We all break rules here and there. You're not going to stop for a stop sign if there's, look around, no cops. Let's just, but those aren't hyper unethical things. When it comes to like the workplace and you're in a job, most people, like, you want to stay away from doing the wrong thing. And nobody I know sociopathically wants to inflict harm on other people. Just as a general rule. I mean, there's exceptions here and there, but this is all just bereft. It's not there when it comes to Trump. And Michael Cohen admits that he was caught up in that way of thinking because it's power. And it was so crystal clear. I mean, I think Michael is telling the truth in most of the book. I think he's telling the truth because, first of all, it's just, this is where book readers, presumably like you listening and me, who I read lots of books, this is just where our critical thinking comes in. So obviously I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. When I hear things on the news, when I see reports about stuff, when I read newspaper articles, when I read blogs, I have to take a grain of salt with everything. I mean, the critical thinking part of my brain goes off, and I think, is this person lying? Do they have any reason to lie? Is what I'm reading true? Are the facts getting distorted? If so, how are they being distorted? What is the purpose of me reading whatever I'm reading? So if I'm watching a movie, I know what I'm being presented is not real, but I put that part of my brain to the side and I go, all right, I'm going to suspend my disbelief. And now we're in this world where what happens throughout what they're telling me is happening isn't real. Obviously, there's actors delivering lines, but how are they doing it? And I can slip into that suspension of disbelief, and it's more enjoyable, and I actually enjoy movies more because of it. I don't, you play video games, and if your criticism is, well, it wasn't realistic enough. Well, bullshit. The point of movies and entertainment is not to be realistic. It's it's an art form. So, when Michael Cohen's writing this book, he even mentions, you don't have to believe me. I lied in front of Congress. I sat there, talked about the Moscow deal, denied, but the reason he was doing it was because he was loyal to Trump. The reason he was doing it was because he was obsessed with getting Trump's approval. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about what he could get out of it. He wanted to be close to power. At the time that Michael Cohen started working for Trump, he was 39 years old. He was already a multimillionaire by his claims. And he got called in through Donald Trump Jr., called him to the office. He met up with Donald Trump. This guy, Cohen, always looked up to the Trump organization. He had read The Art of the Deal in the 80s, was more Republican-leaning, and so kind of had that, tough guy from New York, let's get down to business sort of attitude. And he drank the Kool-Aid when it came to the Trump organization. I mean, he said he was walking up the stairs and he saw all the gold and just the style of the Trump Tower, and he was enthralled with it, and he wanted to be closer to it. So this guy, and I just believe him. I think when someone's writing something down, I don't know if he used a ghostwriter. I don't think he did. I think he, even if he didn't type these words, like let's say they sat in a meeting with a ghostwriter, and Michael Cohen was telling verbally his story, and someone was writing this down, I still think that these words are true. I think what Michael Cohen is trying to say, he put it on paper, and that's what was being transmitted to us. And so through that lens, I am trying to discern where I'm getting bullshitted. Me, the reader, reading his words. And I think at this point, he knows that he's a bad guy. I mean, he said, I was Trump's fixer. I have a law degree. I had millions in the bank. He tells in the first, 2 chapters, how he got his money. And it was through shady New York deals where he was representing someone, helping someone out with a client. That client was going bankrupt, had to hide their assets so they didn't, lose all their money. And the assets were taxi medallions, and they were quoted at much lower price than they actually were. Cohen worked out a deal, got, these taxi medallions. They're actually worth millions of dollars, and they kept growing. So that was just he got it for cheap in an unethical way, it sounds like, and he admits it as such. And then he gets millions of dollars, and now he's 39 years old, works for a law firm, semi-retired, probably bored, and then he gets a call from Don Jr. Now he looks up to Donald Trump, and so he starts working for him, and takes actually a pay cut to go work for Trump. And the first 2 or 3 jobs that he does for Trump is, the first job is firing someone who was semi-connected to the Trump organization, and Trump wanted him gone. So he said, Michael, go and get rid of this guy. And so Michael Cohen fixed the problem and eventually hired him on. Michael Cohen's smart. He knows that the game is played by doing favors for powerful people and then never asking for anything in return, and eventually it'll catch up to you, and that person will help you out. So following that skill set, that logic, he did favors for Trump. Trump hired him, and then he started to pressure other people. He would do favors here and there, but that's what his role was. He was the fixer for the Trump organization. And rife with this, because you don't have an official title, an official position. I guess he was special counsel to the Trump organization, but by the nature of his job, it was almost like he was encouraged to do shady shit. Go and fix this problem. And so the way he would take directions, take orders from the boss, which is how he refers to Trump in this book as the boss, is the boss would tell him, I need this problem solved, go fix it. And Cohen knows, I might have to do illegal things. I might have to pressure people. I might have to pay someone off. I'm going to have to fiddle with the finances. Whatever it takes, I'm going to get it done because the boss asked me to do it. So it's a lot of, he says the boss is like a mafia don in this respect. It's not as overtly illegal, but this makes a lot of sense to me when I was reading through it, and it rings true because what we know about Trump is that is how he operates. He is a master of signaling what he means without saying it explicitly. He's actually horrible at articulation. He's very bad at taking a cohesive point, speaking about it for 3 to 5 minutes, and then driving home to a conclusion at the end of it. He's not good at that. Bernie Sanders got really good towards the end about saying his, Medicare for all and, his sort of semi-radical position, making it very folksy, like a really good politician running. And, it didn't work out for him, but he got really good at it to the end. Trump, even now, is not that good about doing it. But he is good at communicating what he means and getting people around him to say yes. And Trump is a master of, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to disapprove of you and shun you away. And I heard a podcast recently with Duncan Trussell on Joe Rogan Experience, and he said something like, the great American tradition is the con man, and we have one running the country right now. And that was really evident in this book. This guy, it seems like all of New York City, the way they operate is kind of powerful people doing favors for each other, and people who want to get access to that power, they kind of get close to it and do favors and get right in and kind of become a yes man to someone powerful, and then you move up on the ranks and network. That's what Michael Cohen's really good at. And he describes this whole process. And he said, I was a very aggressive lawyer. I would call people, say intimidate them by saying I work for the Trump organization. And he would just bully people. He would make radical claims and back them up. And usually people get scared into submission and they back down. And this is how Trump operates. I mean, this is his MO. Like, there was no amount of collusion with other countries, or there was never an intention for Trump he was going to run as a publicity stunt. And then once he got in, he was just good. So how he was good on the campaign is exactly how we saw it. He is good at reading the crowd and playing into their fears. So he saw that his mostly white middle class audience, like everywhere he used to go in the middle states, what they call the flyover states, like the Midwest, and he just saw that they were like scared of immigrants coming in. So he would say things like with all his comments about Mexicans and things like that early on in the campaign, and that got him free press. And Trump knows from being a celebrity for many years on The Apprentice before he ran for president in the early 2000s, early 2010s, he knows how to play the media. And so he makes outrageous claims. That's just how Trump operates. That is a type of charisma. And it's a charisma that is totally showmanship. It's being a con man. It's saying ridiculous statements. Like salesmen, when you go and try to buy a car from a used car salesman, they will tell you stories. They'll tell you this thing works amazing. The last owner came in. They didn't know anything about this car. And this car runs great, runs awesome. You're going to love it. It's that energy. And it's about the win. It's not about following through. It's not about communicating a statement and saying, these are my values. This is what I stand in. This is what I stand for. And, like having a values-based conversation and then following through with that. That doesn't exist in Trump's world. And Cohen really outlines this. And it's something we all knew all along. But Cohen offers example after example after example of Trump making crazy statements, and then like, oh, I love beautiful women, I sleep with them, and they're amazing, and beautiful young women. And then he has Cohen, his fixer, pay off like for example the Stormy Daniels case that's extensively talked about in this book, where Trump absolutely 100% slept with the porn star while he was married. And here's the bad part. When his youngest son, Barron, was born, and Melania was in the hospital, and then right after, when she was breastfeeding his youngest son, and Trump went out and slept with a porn star, and then years later starts to tell the story about it, and he tells Cohen, fix this. And Cohen did it. And he, involves paying people off. And, this happened in 2006. I want to say. Something like that. I don't remember the exact year. And then the story comes up in 2011, and they bury the story. And how they buried it was Stormy Daniels' representation at the time. She didn't want the story to come out, so she denied it, and Trump denied it, and the lawyers talked, and Cohen covered it all up. But then during the campaign in 2015, 2016, the story comes back out, and Cohen has to go chase down. And Cohen writes extensively about a book had just come out recently called Catch and Kill, and it outlines everything that how Harvey Weinstein covers up all his thing. He pays off people to go out, catch the story, create NDAs, pay off who they need to pay off, and kill the story. So this phenomenon has been described. It's been discovered by journalists. People have written about it. And Cohen was doing the same thing. And he said, he uses the terminology that now in the popular, there's the world that we're aware of it. And he says, this is how powerful men get away with doing whatever they want, just paying off the right people, not letting stories come out. And it turned into everything that it turned into. And the specifics of what happened is Cohen knew that Trump is really cheap. When Trump says he makes decisions straight off the hip. So like, drawing a gun and shoot from the hip, right? Like he says, I want the cheapest paint painted for my a new property I just bought down near Miami or something like that, like down in Florida, and it was called the Coral or the Doral, something like that. And Trump said, I want the cheapest paint, and then they used the cheapest paint, but then 3 weeks later, word came back up the chain, up the tree, back to Trump, and it was like, hey, this paint is peeling off, and Trump gets furious. Trump says, I can't believe that these guys stiffed me. I pay them all this money. He hadn't paid them yet. I'm not going to pay them, for doing a crappy job. And Cohen knows in his heart and in his head, the boss told them to use the cheapest paint, and he's upset that the cheapest paint is not working out. And now he's going to refuse them service. So he sent Cohen to go fix the problem. And they never ended up paying the guys. And this became a big thing. I mean, there was communication back and forth between the owners of, the upper management who was selling the paint, doing all the jobs for the Trump organization, and the people got stiffed. They tested the paint. They were trying to. When you're doing business, there's a sense of trust. It's like, I recently just myself, I just bought a house, and I'm figuring out how people do deals, contractors. We had to get someone to come over and paint the house. And it's like, we agreed upon a price. We shop around. We saw 2 or 3 other painters. They come over to my house. They tell me what I can do. They give me a quote. And I can, I think it could be less. What if I bought the paint? What if you bought the paint? What if you buy this and I'll buy the primer? And we work out a deal. But the agreed upon price is the agreed upon price. I know that I have to pay the person after the job is done. And that's how I did it here. And there's an element of trust that the guy's going to come over and do the right job. But Trump, time after time, doesn't honor these types of commitments. He just goes, I want the job done. And when it's not up to his specification, he gets angry. And then he has his lawyers threaten people and bully people. And then he ends up stiffing all these small businesses. And we know this with, I believe it was in the 80s. They didn't go into detail in the book, but, there's a famous that Trump's father, Fred Trump, they denied black people, access to suites in the Trump, real estate, and it's just like that's really bad, shady business. So, Cohen tells the story of Trump just screwing over the small business owners. He does this time and time again. Then with the Stormy Daniels, he was he agreed with Stormy Daniels' lawyer or her representation to sign an NDA for like $150,000. But Cohen, who facilitated this deal, had the feeling that there's no way Trump is going to actually send the money and pay this thing, because that's not how Trump just doesn't pay up. He's an extremely cheap person. This idea that Trump's a multi-billionaire, and it's all fake. He's not a billionaire. I mean, he has a lot of assets. He bought up a lot of real estate. He has buildings, and they're in the Trump organization. And his kids, Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric primarily, all have businesses of their own. And but Trump is extremely cheap. He doesn't like to pay people, and you don't have that basic trust that you would have with how people do business in America. So Cohen said, out of loyalty, and he says this, he said, I was dumb, and I was loyal, and I was headstrong, and I was aggressive, and I wanted to win, and I wanted Trump to approve of me. So I offered to pay Stormy Daniels off with my own money. And so he did that deal. He took credit based on one of his apartments, and he paid off Stormy Daniels. The story went away. Now, as it turned out, the story, of course, came out, and Trump never commented on it, but everyone in the Trump organization knew. Trump himself never, even behind closed doors, fully admitted, yes, I slept with Stormy Daniels. Let's pay her off. In fact, he would call up on speakerphone with Melania. Trump and Melania on speakerphone would call Cohen, and Trump would have Cohen lie. They were like two frat guys talking about, banging a porn star and how hot she was. Like, they were it wasn't explicitly said, but Trump would be braggadocious about it. But then he would call up and, hey, Cohen, explain to my wife why, how the deal went down. And Cohen said, well, even though it's not true, it could be damaging to your husband, to Trump. So we paid them off and it went away. And as soon as Melania dropped off the phone and Cohen hung up the phone, Cohen knew. He knew in his mind, there's no way Melania believed me. And he had some insight in, even Trump won't tell the truth to his own wife. And then he says something really interesting, and this gets to the postmodern aspect of how this all, where facts don't matter, the truth is an illusion. The way Trump does business is he screws people over, but then he starts to believe his own lies. So in some ways, everything that Trump's saying, Trump doesn't even have the wherewithal he starts to believe his own bullshit. And that was a really dangerous thing that Cohen said, I got sucked up with that. Cohen said, I started to believe the lies, and I started to tell the lies. And then Cohen also starts, he goes into how he met his wife, and his wife's a wonderful person. He has a daughter, and he has a younger son, and they started to hate Trump, and they started to hate his job. Like, Dad, why don't you quit? Can you quit? Can you quit? And, even at one point in the book, this was in late 2000s, Trump and Cohen were at a resort or something, and unknown to Trump, Cohen's daughter was on the tennis court, and she was 15 years old. She was, hitting tennis balls, and it was like Trump made a comment like, check out this piece of ass. And Cohen said, boss, that's my daughter. And Trump, with no reservation, no apologies, nothing at all, goes, oh, I'll date one of her friends in a couple of years, or something. Like, just some gross comment. And Cohen is self-reflective. I mean, he's sitting in prison writing this book going, I should have known at that moment that I was dealing with a bad guy and I was getting sucked into his vortex. And even then, Cohen said, I just brushed it off as, oh, that's just how Trump is. That's how the boss is. And, years go by. I mean, then the presidential campaign starts. His daughter grows up, and his daughter has been telling him, Dad, like, don't go into business with him. Like, stop working for him. You're miserable. Like, stop. And he doesn't listen. So in a lot of ways, I think that buys Michael Cohen a lot of credibility as he's writing this, because he's telling you very honestly all the places where he knew in his heart that he should have stopped working for this just monster, but he didn't. And he would see how Trump would lie and distance himself from other people. He said Trump doesn't have any true friends. And to me, that's very believable. In the way Trump operates in his world, you're either for him, and he says we, like, oh, we did a great job. But he's talking about we in like a third person. Oh, Trump, everyone loves Trump. And he blurs the line between his organization and himself. So his ego is so inflated that, like he would even say like, oh, Donald Jr., when Donald Jr. was in the room, this is like a, 40-something-year-old man. Like, Donald, you're one of the stupidest people I've ever met. Like, talking to Donald Trump was saying this about his oldest son, but his son, Don Jr., and just insulting him. And as Michael Cohen says, that Donald Trump Jr. had a nice life in Montana. He was a hunter, and he was at risk to be cut off from the family. So he came back in to the family business, even though he was being ridiculed by his father, much the same way that Trump Sr. was ridiculed by his father, Fred Trump, when he was growing up in the 60s and 70s. So there's just this egomaniacal, narcissistic person who doesn't have any true feelings. The truth doesn't matter at all. Ordering people around, lying about people. As soon he would meet with someone, oh, great guy. The guy walks out of the room. Oh, I hate that guy. He's so annoying. And to his own children, he would, he's just an asshole. And Cohen sees all this, and he's like, for some reason, he thinks he's going to be safe. But as we all know, the story turns out that Cohen ends up testifying to Congress, lies on behalf of Trump, gets nailed for it. The FBI comes in, raids Cohen's apartment, and Cohen ends up going to, prison, but before he could testify to Congress. And if you haven't seen that, I would recommend that. That is a clip worth watching. Elijah Cummings, who, rest in peace, he's now dead, who was a Democratic congressman who was part of the oversight committee, who kind of look into corruption in the government, had Michael Cohen come in and testify and tell the truth this time. And that's a really good exchange on YouTube. See what Elijah Cummings' closing statements are. But it's something along the lines of, we have to get out of this as a country, as a democracy. What kind of country are we going to leave to our children? Because we have to return to normal. The truth doesn't matter anymore since Trump has gotten into office. And, I watched the entire impeachment trial where they tried to impeach Trump. I watched so many hours of that. And it's all just a sham. And Trump has this way of gaining so much power and then lying about it and somehow gets through it scot-free and doesn't form any real connections, but somehow gets through it in the end. I think that's going to come back to bite him. We none of us know what's going to happen after. It could be Trump ends his first term or Trump gets a second term, but sometime after that, all this tax evasion, all these, it's been put more in the spotlight now because he's become president. Whatever area you want to talk about, the emoluments clause, where Trump is totally not separate from his prior businesses, but as it outlines in the emoluments clause in the Constitution, the president has to separate himself from his businesses. You don't want to be profiting off of, because you have the presidency now, Trump hotels that are more people are going to in other countries. It really blurs the line there. Like, are you profiting off of being the president? It's not supposed to work that way. Yet he is doing it without even, he never even planned. He told the American people, I will give the business to my kids while I become president. He said that during the campaign. When he actually, during the inauguration, when he's the president-elect and he wins the presidency, never had meetings, never prepared. And all that's consistent with what we know about Trump, that he does not prepare for meetings. He just doesn't. He goes with his gut. He goes with his instinct. And then has people like Cohen fix all his problems. So, all right, kind of getting down to the end. This book was so fascinating to me. It was such an interesting insight into what our current president is like. And it's consistent with a lot of things. I know it's a hit piece. It is basically it's a whole book of Cohen talking about important events that we all know about, that we heard about on the news, but he says it from his perspective on what he did. And he admits his faults. Cohen was a bad guy. He says, I was on a phone call and it was me, Trump, and another guy, and they were two bad people on the call, but I was the third one because I made all the bad things happen. So this is a man at the end of his, he's lost. He knows he's lost. He's in prison writing about all the things that he did. He explains why he did it, that he was addicted to power, and he was obsessed with the Trump brand, and Trump screwed him over in the end. 10 years of loyal service, 10 years plus of loyal service, and he had insights it was going to come down. The last words that Trump ever said to him was, don't worry, Michael, I've got your back. It's the last conversation you ever had with Trump, and now he ends up testifying to Congress, telling the truth, trying to come clean, trying to be good to his Cohen's trying to be good to his wife, because the FBI was going to indict her too, and just admits to everything, gets sentenced to prison for 36 months, eventually does get released due to the coronavirus pandemic. He, gets released. He is under house arrest. And even then, Trump and, the epilogue of this book outlines, and he provides documents to all this too, that the Attorney General William Barr is sending people kind of down the line to kind of get back at Cohen even more, and they try to prevent him from releasing a book. They try to get Cohen to write a statement that said, I agree to not talk about any of my dealings, and I agree to not post on social media. I agree to not tell any of my friends or family to post on social media about my time regarding the president, and all this weird stuff. It's Cohen is sitting, at this time they actually brought him in to a probation hearing after he was on house arrest. So he goes into the Southern District of New York City, and they give him 8 paragraphs to sign so that, he can move on with his parole as, sort of the transition of he's serving a sentence to serve out the rest of the sentence. This is what it requires. And Cohen's reading this, and he provides the documents, and it screenshots of the documents that he was going to be forced to sign. And Cohen's lawyer that he had with him said, absolutely, my client cannot do this because accidentally one of his friends or family could release statements about his time. It takes away his First Amendment rights, So Cohen says, I won't sign the document. Let's revise it. Okay, you can revise. We'll revise the document. We'll take it back. Can you go wait in the lobby? Cohen and his lawyer go and sit in the lobby, and they wait. And an hour and a half goes by. And that's when U.S. Marshals and again, presumably from William Barr, sent them down the line, rearrest him, and they say, you are being sentenced, like you have to go back to prison. You can't do home arrest anymore because you are refusing to sign your document, the document. And it's like, you can't take out my First Amendment rights. So the point in saying all that, and I don't know the legal details or anything like this. You should read the book if you're further interested in all this, because it outlines it very clearly. But there is no there is loyalty to Trump. You have to do what he says. But if you want to tell the truth and you want to get out of that world, that dark current that just of deception and lies, and if you go against Trump in any way, as a president, he has so much power that he is going to shut you down. And that's what we're seeing. So in a lot of ways, we're getting unique insight into someone who tried to hitch up with the right, like, power guy and, a person in power and high power. And it didn't work out for Michael Cohen. And so he's writing a tell-all. But my thought on this is that it's too late. You, Michael Cohen, through admitting in your own words, you only decided to tell the truth after you got caught. And yeah, it's better late than never, but the only reason he wrote this book is because he's in prison and he could write a book about it. So, a virtuous man would have said no to the things that he was asked to do he would have done it 14 years ago in 2006 when he first started to work for the Trump organization. So we're seeing a disbarred lawyer who rubbed shoulders with powerful people and lost the game. But the moral of the story is that there's still an individual in power who's using the office of the president in all the wrong ways that was outlined in the Constitution. Our founding fathers thought of this. We don't want monarchs. We don't want a king. We don't want someone who, the Supreme Court had a ruling recently that was even the president is not above the law, yet our president right now is acting in that way. And there's a lot of collateral damage. There's a lot of people being hurt. There's a lot of small businessmen that were screwed along the way. And, it's an awful thing. It didn't make me feel good. I was enthralled while I was reading the book, but when I would put my Kindle down and kind of think about this, like, for hours after I was reading it, I probably spent 6 hours the first day, 4 hours the next day, and then 3 hours the third day. I just finished it up today, just reading this book. And another thing I'll say is just reading about all this Jeffrey Epstein stuff, this horrible, recruiting just minors to have sex with powerful people on a pedophile island. It's just, the elite it's so shady, and these billionaires think they can get away with anything they want. And we're revealing all of Epstein's connections and nobody's talking about it. It's fascinating to see a little bit into this world. Now, I don't know if Trump was, and it's actually not talked about at all in this book. Cohen's, it's not said at all. But seeing that, is this conspiracy theory true? And in a lot of ways, it is. At least all the elements are there. We're seeing lawyers who will do anything for powerful people. You'll see powerful people absolutely acting with no virtues, no morals, doing whatever they want, not telling the truth. And that's such a simple, basic thing. It's what we learned when we were toddlers, right? Tell the truth. If you hit another kid in the playground and they hit you back, the kid who hits back is going to say, well, he hit first. Well, that doesn't matter. Like, what? No, the truth, it matters. It matters. If you don't retaliate, but you get caught. It just breaks my brain. It's just like, I mean, I'm a young person. Like, I'm a young guy. Like, I don't want to go into a world that's like this. I'm in the workforce now, but is this how it is when you move up in our country? Like, there was a lot of shady shit happening with the Bush era. So I grew up, I remember I don't remember how old I was. No, actually, I was 8 years old when Bush became president. And then we went into war. Like 9/11 happened. I was 9 years old. I remember it pretty clearly, as much as you can from like a third grader perspective. But that's how old I was. And I saw us going into war, and the whole country was gung-ho to going into war. But as it turned out, as we all know now, invading Afghanistan, invading Iraq, based on lies that the government told us. You know, if you watch that movie Vice, about Dick Cheney, he had a lot of incentives to go to war. You could profit off of it. It seems to be that that's the motive why they went and invaded those countries. And then Obama, who comes in and says, we're not going to, I get some of this from the Joe Rogan podcast, so bear with me. Like it's not accurate forms of information. I actually just heard the recent podcast with in September 2020 when they had Edward Snowden on, and Edward Snowden says, they had a whistleblower. Like, Obama, when he came in, was like not going to prosecute whistleblowers. He was going to encourage whistleblowers in the government for intelligence agencies to speak up when they see wrong things. Well, Edward Snowden did exactly that. He gave the NSA is spying on people. They're doing it under the Patriot Act and other provisions that came through. It's not ethical. It's not preventing terrorism. Yet Obama was influenced by who knows what, that he, towards the end of his presidency, had no protection for whistleblowers. So someone like Edward Snowden, who's, exiled in Russia or wherever he is now, is not pardoned. So you have that with the Bush lying. You have that with Obama not protecting whistleblowers. And then you have Trump, who's tax evasion, emoluments clause, screwing people over, doing things to get himself impeached that didn't stick because he surrounds himself with powerful people. And it's I still have hope. I still have hope because I think there's a lot of smart people in this country, and I think the American dream is still alive. My fiance right now, her family comes from Puerto Rico, and she was born in America, and she was born in New York, so she, first person in her family to go to college. Now she's getting her master's degree, her doctorate degree, and making a lot more income, and she's projected to make even more. And her family came from nothing, like from, just lower middle class Puerto Rican, come to America, and one generation later, she's along with me. We're gonna get married. She has a home. We have a home together. We were able to put a down payment on a home. We're projected to live very comfortably in our 30s and 40s and 50s. And whatever that is what America is. And, you don't lie to get there. She had to take out federal student loans, which is a whole nother system of preying upon young people, get them to sign loans that can never be forgiven. You guys already know all this. I'm not going to go into detail, but despite all that, the upward trajectory, if you want to succeed in this country, you do it by telling the truth, by working hard, networking, sure, but I don't. It's depressing to read about this at the very top, and it's all people. New York City is just. It's like the mafia from the 20s, 30s, and 40s that was quashed by the CIA, the FBI. It's still alive, but now it's like legal. It's like cleaner. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. I mean, we're reading stories about this happening. I mean, stories are coming out. This sparked me to read other books, and so we'll see if I do other book reviews in the future. But it's so interesting that I heard somewhere that in England, the way that the Brits kind of they have, World War II, London was bombed, so dead people on the streets. They kind of all get together, clear out the bodies. Winston Churchill gets up and says, "We're going to do the right thing." Kind of inspire the people. It's kind of bright and a bright future, but they're sort of cynical, but deep down inside, they have that positivity. America's the opposite of that, right? We are bright-eyed, fast-talking, we can get it done. Let's work hard. I'm the best. Charisma. Let's make a deal. Business. We're going to inflate. We're making so much. We're the best country. We're the number one. But quietly, we have that cynicism that no one is going to trust me. You're out for yourself. I don't trust this guy. Screw whoever you got to screw over, anybody you got to screw over to get ahead. And that's the quiet part of America. And reading books like this reinforces all that. We live in a weird postmodern time where we don't even know what truth is. Like, many people can watch the same police interaction with people on the street, recently with Black Lives Matter and with all the protests. Like, we can watch the same video. All Americans can watch the same video and pull out radically different thoughts and ideas. And that's why the left kind of puts it into identity politics. Well, based on, if you were black growing up in the inner city, you have a certain viewpoint on the cops, and this is where it comes from. And then, if you're the cops, you want law and order, and this is they're not given the right tools, and there's depression, anxiety rampant everywhere, and the opioid epidemic. There's all these reasons that people are hurting, and the police are hurting, and that's why they take it out on seemingly innocent people. It's just, but we can't agree on, hey, be a good person, be ethical, be truthful, do the right thing. When you see something wrong in the workplace, stand up for it. And if you stand up for it, you'll be rewarded, as opposed to thrown in jail or exiled like Edward Snowden, or you'll be fired from your company like Michael Cohen and thrown in jail. There's got to be a breaking point, and I don't think this is going to be the period of our time where we look back and say the best years are past, and it's all downhill from here, and there's going to be a civil war, and America's going to be no longer what it once was, like a beautiful country in the 50s and 60s, and then again in the 80s, and slightly uptick in the 90s, and then now we've just been on a downward trend since then. I have high hopes. I part of that is I have to. I'm 27 years old. I gotta have some optimism here, despite all this. And I hope that this summary has been enlightening for anyone. I hope that I wasn't too rambly and trying to connect too many different thoughts. But I think I gave a good overview of the book. If this is if you listen to this point, you've been interested enough that I would recommend that you read this book, or drop a comment, leave me something that if you want to hear more about a certain section. There's so much more to this book. There's so much more. an interesting character. The way he writes is like a New York, I don't want to say mobster, like a crime guy, but like he definitely, Michael Cohen grew up when he was a teenager, a young man, and he looked up to gangsters in New York and wanted to be like them. And so he found Trump and he acted that fantasy out. And now he's in prison in his 50s, disgraced, disbarred. Too little, too late, but maybe his story could tell us something. And maybe we need to have, I'm not even going to say maybe, I do think this is the solution. The solution is act ethically, act truthfully, without the religious context of the following phrase, do unto others as you would have them done to you. It's the golden rule. It's treat people with respect, and don't just think, what can I get out of this person, or make it about money or power or fame or notoriety. All this is real bad for it. It's a winning formula for America, but it's not a winning formula for the country. For us to, as Elijah Cummings said in his closing statements to Michael Cohen the second time he was there, like, we got to get back to a new normal. We have to get rid of this. We have to have faith in our politicians, and we've been losing that for as long as I've been alive. So, yeah, that's my summary of Disloyal. A fascinating read, and I hope that you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much for your time.